All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour. The deal to release about 50 hostages who are in the custody of Hamas in exchange for 150 Palestinians who at this moment are in Israeli prisons has actually been achieved after a lot of hectic back and forth negotiations. Now, the countries that have played a key part in these negotiations include the likes of Qatar and Egypt, along with the United States. So let's tell you some of the details of what happened behind the scenes. It started with Qatar, a long-established mediator in the region, shortly after Hamas's incursion into southern Israel. Qatar reportedly approached the White House with some sensitive information regarding the hostages. The Qatari officials requested for a team called a cell to be established to work on this issue privately. The Biden administration addressed the request. The U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan put a seasoned diplomat with deep West Asia experience, Brett McGurk, on the job. Another National Security Council official, Josh Gelzer, was tasked to set up the team. The cell operated and no other U.S. agency knew about it. The U.S. Middle East envoy McGurk held daily conversations with the Qatari Prime Minister that were reported back to Jake Sullivan and also to the American President Joe Biden, who was directly involved. On the 13th of October, Biden spoke with the families of the American hostages who were taken by Hamas. On the 18th of October, Biden met with the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu in Tel Aviv, and he spoke to him predominantly about securing the release of the hostages and also about a humanitarian truce. Now, days later, on the 23rd of October, the efforts of this behind-the-scenes negotiations yielded some positive results. 2 American hostages, a mother and a daughter duo, were allowed to walk free by Hamas. Now, this was the very first hostage release of this mother and daughter duo who were released on humanitarian grounds, and it gave the Biden administration hope that more such breakthroughs could be achieved. This was the time when talks also began between the CIA and the Mossad chiefs on a regular basis. The very next day, on the 24th of October, the U.S. also got a word that Hamas had agreed to one of the deal specifics to release women and children. However, this was also the time that Israel was preparing to launch a ground invasion into Gaza. This was an all-out, full-scale ground invasion. And for this deal to pan out, the Israeli operation had to be delayed. The U.S. officials then debated on the issue with the Israelis, but the Israeli officials put forward the argument that there is absolutely no proof that the hostages were even alive, and therefore they could not agree to delay the ground offensive. Hamas had claimed that they could not determine as to who they were holding as hostages until a pause in the fighting began. The United States and Israel saw this as a bit dubious, and Israel, of course, went ahead with its ground invasion with some horrific consequences on the ground in terms of civilian casualties. Now, Israel has said that it is open to a pause in fighting if a hostage deal, of course, comes together. And after the Israeli operation began, Biden, for weeks, engaged in negotiations on the hostages. Now, demands were made that Hamas must produce the list of hostages that it is holding, their identifying information, and also guarantees of their release. The communication was difficult, and messages had to be passed from Doha or Cairo into the Gaza Strip and back. As a result, these talks and agreement was taking shape. In the first phase, women and children hostages would be freed in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. And this was agreed by all sides except by Hamas on producing a list of criteria identifying the hostages. On the 9th of November, the CIA chief met with the Mossad counterpart and Qatari leaders in Doha. But the key obstacle remained on Hamas's refusal to identify who it was holding. Now, 3 days later, Biden, of course, called the Emir of Qatar and demanded this crucial information. Shortly after Biden's call, Hamas produced the details of the hostages it said it would release in the first phase. On the 14th of November, Biden in a call urged Netanyahu to take the deal, and Netanyahu agreed. However, the talks were stalled as communications went dark in the Gaza Strip because Israel had bombed the communication towers there. On the 18th of November, the U.S. diplomat McGurk met in Doha with the Qatari Prime Minister. The CIA chief was also dialed in after he spoke with Mossad. The meeting identified the last remaining gaps towards a deal. The agreement was now structured for women and children to be freed in the first phase, but also with an aim of bringing all hostages home to their families. On the 19th of November, in Egypt, the U.S. diplomat met with the Egyptian intelligence chief, and there he learned that Hamas leaders had accepted nearly all the agreements discussed the day before in Doha. In Cairo, the officials worked out the one remaining issue, the number of hostages that had to be released, and ultimately they agreed on a deal to release 50 women and children. So what will be the impact of this humanitarian pause? Because this pause will be for a period of 4 days. My colleague Shivan Chanana gets you more.
A ceasefire deal with the Hamas group that would bring a temporary halt to a devastating war that has stretched on for over 6 weeks between Israel and Hamas. Under the deal, Hamas is to free 50 of the over 200 hostages that it is holding in the Gaza Strip over a 4-day period. The Israeli government said that it would extend the lull by an additional day for every 10 hostages released. Now here's a look at how the temporary truce will affect the ongoing war. First, let's take a look back at what has happened in the past. Since 1948, Israel has fielded a frightening military machine for Hamas. It is a hugely asymmetric struggle. Hamas needed to find a way out, including for the sake of its own population, who are paying the highest price here. The temporary truce will bring respite for people. The fighting in Gaza has been taking place in a densely populated area, and Hamas fighters are physically close to and even perhaps immersed in civilian populations of Gaza. Now, the United Nations and other world organizations have said that it is essential for Hamas to free the hostages that it holds. The people of Gaza, on the other hand, have critical humanitarian needs: food, water, shelter, safety, fuel, as well as hospital and medical support. All is needed in the Gazan region. Now, the decades-long conflict between Israelis and Palestinians is rooted in competing claims to the Holy Land, and it includes disputes over borders, Jerusalem, security, and Palestinian refugees. Both Israel and Hamas have broken ceasefire agreements in the past, and in 2008, Gaza truce was broken after Israeli troops killed 6 Hamas gunmen in a raid into the territory. Now, then, in 2014, Hamas broke a ceasefire by killing 2 soldiers and kidnapping a 3rd. However, the stakes are high and the situation is different this time around. Both Israel and Hamas would want to abide by terms and not put their main backers in a tough spot, that is, the US and Qatar. Hamas remains committed to the death and destruction of Israel. Senior Hamas officials have stated that the group intends to attack Israel, and they intend to attack Israel again. Analysts say the temporary truce would give Hamas time to reorganize, regroup, and rearm, further extending the war. The Palestinian group would look to restock its arsenal of rockets, repair its communication systems, reorganize its scattered forces, and also assess the damage to its strategic underground tunnel network, which has been its biggest strength as of now in this war. The ceasefire may delay the possibility of returning other hostages home. It would allow Hamas to move the hostages without fear of an Israeli raid to rescue them, ruining any intelligence Israel might have on the hostages' whereabouts. Strategic experts also say that ceasefire would send a dangerous message to Israel's additional adversaries in the region, and there are a number of them, particularly the Iranian-backed terrorist group Hezbollah in Lebanon.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.